So I think we can start officially. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I am Laura Leuzzi, and I will be your host for this event. You have everything it takes to get what we need. Steve Lambert's presentation at the Maker Faire Rome. First of all, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Valentino Catricalà for the kind invitation and everyone on the Maker Faire for the organization. I will briefly introduce Steve. That needs no introduction, but you know. And then I will leave him the floor to introduce you his work and his practice. Steve Lambert has worked alongside over 1,400 artists and activists in 20 countries on 4 continents, helping them to effect power. Trained in the arts, is known for large-scale public projects that engage new audiences on difficult topics through the social science of comedy, games, theater, and democratic participation. Lambert is the co-founder and co-director of the Center for Artistic Activism, a research and training institute helping activists be more creative and artists be more effective. Lambert has presented several times at the United Nations, and his work has been collected by Museum and the Library of Congress. He was a senior fellow at the New York's I-Beam Center for Art and Technology from 2006 to 2010. Developed and led workshop for Creative Capital Foundation, and is assistant professor at SUNY Purchase in New York.
Hi, thank you. I'm just realizing that because this is online and it's not like a formal theater and stuff, that we could make this, like I just said right before we started, Laura, you and I should talk more during this, but also we can get people's chat. I want to see like a lot of stuff happening in the chat. So if you're here and you're listening to this, just write hi in the chat right now. And we'll get that started that way. So Corinna asked if this is going to be, this recording's going to be available later on, and I assume it is, right?
We will look into that if the full recording will be available. Thank you, Corinna, for your question.
Yeah, but you're here now, so that's the important part. So yeah, so say hello. I see 1 hi, 2 highs from Desiree and Kiara. So I'm gonna accept that. And yeah, just say hello. And if you have questions as we're going too, type them in there and I'll try to answer them. What I was gonna do is give a little bit of background on some work that I did in a way that may make sense leading up to what I'm working on now and share that with you. And then talk about some of the strategies that lead to that. And in the meantime, be directed by all of your comments and Laura's prompts and things like that. So I'm going to go back kind of chronologically to a pretty early project of mine, which was this called Simmer Down Sprinter. And basically it was a 2-seat video game, and the interface was one of the things that was different, right? So it measured your stress level, and then based on your stress level, you went faster or slower in the game. So it's like this running race, and this is me as a runner here, and in this ridiculous outfit. And then it would measure your stress level through, oh man, I can't remember what this is called anymore. It's been so long, but it measures resistance between 2 points on your body. And it's one of the things that they use in a lie detector. Not that lie detectors are legit, they're not, but it's a way of measuring your stress. So when you tense up, your skin literally tenses up and there's less resistance between these 2 points. So it would measure it between your fingers, and then it would measure your temperature. And based on that average, you'd go faster or slower in the game. So I had I had made other work that was, let me go backwards a little bit. So my experience as an artist, like I didn't grow up in the fine arts. And while I just decided to go to art school because a friend of mine worked in the mailroom and he thought it would be a good idea. And he brought the application to our apartment because he was my roommate too. And he was like, this is the application for the San Francisco Art Institute. You should fill this out. I'll take it back. And I was like, okay. And so I did it. And then kind of, you know, I mean, I did want to go there, but that's how I ended up at the San Francisco Art Institute. So I had never been to a museum, an art museum, prior to starting art school. And yeah, so my background was a little bit different. And it was also, I was thrown into like politics kind of early because in San Francisco at the time, there was this big .com boom, right? I worked at food.com in the late 90s because another friend of mine was like, you should come get this job. I'll make sure you get paid well. It doesn't matter that you don't know what you're doing. And I was a quality assurance engineer at food.com and worked on the Kentucky Fried Chicken website and stuff. But my job really was just to pretend like I looked like I knew what I was doing and not say a whole lot. And I survived several rounds of layoffs doing that. But anyway, did not have a lot of experience with technology and did not definitely, but during that time, there was a lot of money in the city and I got served 2 different evictions of my apartment because they wanted to get us, you know, artists out and get real paying renters in there, you know, like triple the rent. And so while I was at art school, I fought 2 different eviction cases that went to court and had to, the second one, like I defended myself in court, which was terrifying. And then, so I would be going to San Francisco Superior Court and then back to art school. And art school started to seem really weird in comparison to fighting for my home in court. So I had this sort of political background. And when I got back to school after all that, a lot of my teachers would describe my artwork as didactic, which I don't know if this translates, but in the United States, that is a horrible insult to artists to call work didactic. It means it's like you're beating people over the head. And I got called didactic so often, I eventually looked it up in the dictionary, and it doesn't mean an asshole that's beating you over the head with like his ideas. It literally means teaching. And I was like, teaching, I like that. I'm okay with that. So when I made this video game, this was as I was finishing that up with all these teachers who had called me didactic. And I remember one of them said, Steve, you know, we think this is really good. This is the least didactic artwork you've ever made. Which was like, you know, oh, your kid is the least ugliest kid I've ever seen or something. You know, it's just kind of like, I guess that's nice. But what I said in response was, no, you're wrong. This is the most didactic thing I've ever made. It's literally telling you how to feel and teaching you how to feel. So the idea was to trick people into relaxing and training like you would in a game with these rewards and competition, people how to chill out and not care about winning. Because if you cared about winning, it was actually a stress response and you wouldn't do as well. So people, it would happen a lot. They would get close to the finish line because they're relaxed, and they'd get excited that they might win, and their runner would just stop, freeze, you know, because the stress meter would go up. So yeah, I was teaching people to relax and to not care about winning anymore, and they didn't even realize it. And I was getting them to pay me to do it because the game took quarters. So I programmed this in not PD, Max MSP Jitter, which still exists. It's a very visual programming language, which helped me out because I didn't know how to do that kind of stuff. And I just had this idea of the outcome that I wanted, what I wanted the experience to be at the end. And I had a feeling that if I kept that in mind, I didn't have to learn all programming. I just had to learn enough programming to get that done. And then I collaborated too with some electrical engineers that could help me with the sensors and stuff, because this is pre-Arduino and like you can just order stuff. So I had to have people make custom circuits for me and stuff in the electrical engineering department of the university. So there was that collaboration, but also the like first entry into that kind of technology. What are you gonna say, Laura?
Well, that a number of elements that actually are very central, kind of key to your practice and your career are coming up. You said collaboration.
Yeah.
If we go through your career, I would say all of your works have been developed in collaborations, if not probably 99%. And sort of the collaborative practice seems to be a key to your approach, both in your activism and your art, and in your art and activism when it merges. So how do you find a collaborator? How do you, my question would be, how do you choose a collaborator? Is there a way, a secret to choose a successful collaboration?
Sort of. I think there's a lot of different ways you can collaborate, and it was good. I was able to learn this early on, that it doesn't always have to be like 50-50. We both came up with this idea together at the same time, and we have a hand equally in everything, that there are other ways that you can do it where like someone sort of takes a lead at different points, and someone has more of a maybe like worker role, and the other person has the idea role, but that should switch every once in a while. Otherwise, you're just like an unpaid employee, and that those roles flip.
We have a question from the chat. Artis Carapassa asks, do you involve your students too?
Sometimes it's that there's like a power dynamic there. So if I do, I'm like really clear of, hey, I'm going to involve you in this. I want you to learn this. I want you to get this out of it, right? And I think that's important in any collaboration, is like that everyone's sort of getting something that they want out of it. So with students, sometimes it's like, we're going to try this. You're going to do this thing you've never done before, and you're going to learn a lot about it, and you're going to help me at the same time. But I'm like aware, I try not to do that. Like it's always, I have ex-students that graduated a year ago that like, it just so happened we ended up working together on something, and I'm like, I have to like somehow cleanse myself of this, like that I'm the teacher, and you know what I mean? Like no matter how much I try to avoid that in my teaching, it's there, and you have to sort of be conscious of it, and somehow I need to burn that away even after they've graduated. But yeah, anyway, so I kind of do and don't. But anyway, the thing about these changing roles, and then also the taking advantage of different kinds of expertise. So with this game, I had a friend who was a really great graphic designer, and we had worked together before. And I was like, I kind of had an idea about how the design could work, but I knew he would just do a much better job. So I wrote to him and was like, hey, I have this video game. Here's a sketch of kind of something I'm like thinking about. Would you be up for helping me out with the graphics? And he was so excited to like do something that's silly. I think I sent him an Evel Knievel doll, and like, it's like, it should be red and blue and do this, and and then we just use those graphics. And something similar with like the music that was in it. I kind of knew what I wanted, but it would take me a long time to figure out how to do it myself. And it's just easier to work with other people that have different kinds of expertise and share the expertise and make something better than you could on your own. So yeah, so that's some of the collaboration stuff. But also another reason I brought this one up first is because it's like thinking about the outcome that I want. Like I want a game that teaches people to relax instead of stress out. And like then having an idea of a game dynamic that would do that, but not necessarily knowing how it would be made. Like I don't know if I made this clear, but I had like not really programmed anything besides an Apple IIe when I was 7 years old, in that in-between time. I got really punk rock in there and thought computers were stupid unless someone was paying me stupid money to not actually work on them. Then I took a job at food.com. But yeah, I just kind of stayed away from computers for a really long time. And then I had this project that I wanted to work on, then figure out how to do it. So this is maybe a good time to talk about too this creative process thing that we teach about in the Center for Artistic Activism, and I'll talk about the center a little bit later, but there are a lot of models for a creative process, and one of them is, you see it in different forms, like in design teaching and stuff, and it starts with research. So, you know, research is not necessarily reading a bunch of books, it's like your whole lived life. So when I was drawing on research for this video game, it's like every video game I've played, and like spending times in arcades when I was, you know, 8 years old and stuff, drawing on that, but also the online research I would do on like people's homemade arcade cabinets and stuff. And then the next stage after research is like a combination or experimenting, right? So I've got this idea of measuring people's stress, biofeedback, and then I've got a video game, a sit-down arcade game, and like what happens if I put those together. So in the experimentation phase, you're just like trying to combine different stuff and see how it works together, and we're playing with materials. It's not critical, it's not, there's no judgment, it's just like messing around. And then the third stage after that, then you kind of evaluate these combinations and say, this actually is exciting and I could do this has a lot of potential as a project, or this one I thought could be good, but it clearly needs a little bit more of this or that to make it worthwhile, or there's just, it seemed like a good idea, but just because this is blue and this is blue doesn't necessarily make it better, you know, when I put them together. And then once you have this idea, then the last stage is executing it, right? And building the whole thing up and making it work and doing what you have, you know, working with other people, or breaking open a piggy bank or staying up late, you know, to get it done. It's like that execution phase. And the art form really is not doing those steps. It's knowing how to do them in balance, right? So we work with a lot of people who say that they're not really creative, you know, like I don't know how to draw, or whatever it is that they makes them self-conscious about stuff. But anybody can do these steps, and like one of the ways I like to, an example I like to give of them is if you're planning a vacation, right? So to plan a vacation, you kind of need to go through all these steps. What are the different like vacations I can go on? What are all the different places? Like how can I get there? Like that research, right? And then the second part is, okay, so what if we went to this place on a plane on these dates? Like how does that combination work, right? And then you say, wow, that could work, or that would be like a little bit too expensive for me, so let's look at the train, or, you know, let's make some changes and go back to this stage. Then you decide, this is a good idea, I like this vacation plan, and then the last step is you go on vacation, right? So a lot of people get those steps wrong. They plan a whole vacation and then don't go, or they don't do enough research and they go to a place that in the end they didn't really like that much, you know. But we all know how to do these steps. The art form is really just getting them in balance and spending enough time on each one before you move on. When you, sometimes I'll work with young people that just don't do enough stuff in their life to have interesting things to build with, right? So I teach at a university just outside of New York City. It's a 50-minute train ride, and I have students who have never been to New York City, and like they're not doing enough research, you know. So a lot of times I'll just be like, live your life, like experience more things, watch these movies, you know, like what are the things that you're into, and then bring that to this. But yeah, it's getting that balance right, and anyone can do that, right? But let's talk about another project. This one is called Ad Art, and I will just do this quick screen share thing again. This was a project I did a few years later, once I kind of understood what you could do with technology, you know, like it just seemed like all these doors had been opened. And then thinking about how I wanted things to work differently, right? So I had this game that was built on relaxing. So just sort of taking a piece and changing how it worked. And with ad art, it was a similar thing where it's like, okay, well, I have an ad blocker on in my browser. And by the way, everyone should. It's a great thing. You're not doing anything wrong. And then, but it kind of reminded me of murals and graffiti in San Francisco, right? Like there are all these artists I knew that wanted to paint on walls, but all the walls had ads on them. And so I was blocking ads in a browser, but like, why couldn't we replace them with art? And so we basically figured out a way to do that. And it's a browser extension that once the page loads, it finds all the ads on the page and then replaces them with art. And I could show you this too. Later on, collaborated with a organization. Like we ran it on our own for a long time, and then collaborated with a foundation called Catist that's based in France, and they have an office in San Francisco. And they started curating the art for it. So they call them artist essays, and there's 13 of them you can draw on, and then you can make your own too. So the artwork or the ads on your browser would be replaced by this work by John Rubin, which was pictures of kids on his street doing weird stuff. Parts of these old postcards and things like that, right? Or you could make your own, and it replaces all the ads on the internet with those images. And there's a couple nice things that happens with this. One is that people realize like the power that they have, that they're not just subject to the ads that come in, that they can do something with an ad blocker, which is always exciting. If you've ever installed an ad blocker on your browser, like it feels powerful and it feels good to not have to watch ads on YouTube anymore. It's just empowering, literally. So, but the other piece is that it could be better, right? Like we could have this entirely different experience. The world could be different in this very simple way, right? And that power that you have, or that twist that you can make, translates to other things in your life. So Kiara, you're asking, are the contents random? How are they replaced? So basically, the code is all online, and if you're asking in that more technical way, but in a more layman's way, like it, the page loads, it figures out where ads would be based on a list of commonly known ads, which you can find online and are shared pretty freely by people. Of like, this URL is a YouTube ad and you don't want to watch it, or this sort of formula for the code is where ads would appear. And then it finds those and then has a set of images and replaces them with the images. And you're like, why don't you just show us, Steve? Why don't you give us an example? And I would, except I have so many ad blockers in this space that I can't, it doesn't work. I have one on my network so that I don't get ads on my TV or anything, my smart TV. So it doesn't actually work in my house because that's how big the walls I have around this. But yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Or if you're interested, there is a video instructions on Steve's website, so that if you want to install the add-on, or you are interested how it works, it's you can find it at visitsteve.com. And on the home page, you can actually browse a number of projects that Steve has developed over the years, including there is a video that actually walks you through how to install this add-on. Talking about the art that you can actually stream, it looks like at the end a sort of a curated virtual space, a sort of small exhibition.
Yes.
In a sense, because you can select museums. I remember that in the video you show from the Brooklyn Museum, as for example, works from the Brooklyn Museum.
Yes.
So actually it follows in a way the tastes and the inclinations of the person who's browsing.
Yeah, you can make choices, right? And that was part of, at first, this is a good thing. This is a good sort of note about collaboration. It doesn't always quite work out the way that I want. And part of my, I think part of the way that I make it work is just like stubbornness and not giving up on things and waiting years for it to come together. So in the beginning, I didn't want to choose the art that like thousands of people would see, that just felt like too much responsibility. So I tried to find legit curators to curate the work, and then they would pick another person, like another curator. And oh man, the complaints about the art were not like overwhelming, but it was just annoying every time. Like, I don't like this. And I would write the person back and be like, when you go into a museum, one, do you expect to like everything? And two, like, do you complain to the director of the museum that you don't like the art and that it should be changed? Like, why are you writing me? And to me, it was always like this overlap of like a customer service kind of model instead of a gift model, or like, we're just doing this because we want to and giving it away. Like, why are you writing me with complaints about the artwork? Like, make your own. But in the end, I had this formula things that I would, like a menu that I would write back to the different kinds of complaints. But when we made another version of it with Cadist, I was like, if you guys don't want, if you want to make your life easier, just make it so that you can import and share any image, and then no one will complain about the artwork because it's just like there and they can choose whatever they want. But also it had this purpose within the project of getting people to realize like that they can take control. It's not just another person putting images in front of them.
It's an empowering process. I think that actually empowerment, it's part of all the key elements that we were talking about before. In a sense, you were empowered even with the sprinter, because
Yeah.
you had control. And I think that actually the real gift here in both works is control, giving people the power of control,
Yeah.
in a sense of self-control. So I guess, although, you're not showing everything you've done, but because you have done so many works over the years, but I think that actually all the key features of your practice are little by little emerging, I guess.
Yes. And you said self-control. I also made a project called Self-Control that you could list like websites that you didn't want to be able to visit and just say, I don't want to be able to see Reddit for like 3 hours because I'm done, and you put in your password and it won't let you visit those sites anymore until the timer is up, and then gave that away. And I think like, this is a maker fair. Most people have had that moment where like you make your first circuit or you program something and it's like, oh my God. And it's not about like, I made a light flash on this LED, but what that means, right? Like of all the other things that if I do a little bit more of this or I research a little bit more, I could make all these things, right? And that was a really important thing for me to share with other people, not the like that I have the experience and then I make a bunch of flashing LEDs or I, like have control over the technology, but for them to experience what that control's like so that then they realize how much in the rest of the world they can make changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Douglas Rushkoff, he's a writer. People probably know his books. There's a bunch of them, but there's one called it's like I forget the name. I just remember the subtitle, but it's like 10 Commandments for a Better Digital Future or something like that. And in it, it's really great book. It's very short, very readable, but there's this analogy that people use, which is like you can drive a car without knowing how an engine works, right? And that people use computers without, and it's not important that they know how to program. It's just important that they know how to drive, right? Which is one analogy, but he kind of critiques it, and he's like, it's not that you need to know how the engine works. It's like you need to be in the driver's seat. Like the way that technology works now is you are more in the passenger seat and you're going along for a ride and you're not driving, And so knowing how to program or knowing how programs work knows
Yes.
like I can steer and I can take control, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So So yeah, so we talked about the video game, we talked about ad art. I'm gonna show this other project, which is called the New York Times Special Edition. And this was right after Barack Obama was elected president in 2008. And in the run up to that, there are a lot of protests against the Iraq war. There were, what else was going on? There was a lot to protest. And the protests were mostly because it was the Bush administration for so long about what we didn't want and what people should stop doing and things like that. And so as we saw like that administration was going to change, we decided to make a protest that would celebrate what we wanted instead of stopping what we didn't, that this could be like a turning point. And the original plan was to make this big parade and kind of announce things that weren't happening, like universal healthcare and the end of the war, and then parade and celebrate these things in person, so that people had to say like, well, wait, is it really over, or what's actually going on? And over time we developed that idea turned into this newspaper. So a week after Barack Obama was elected, we made thousands of copies of this paper, like 85,000 copies, which is about the level of production for like a lot of European cities. There's a Metro paper or something, like these papers that are given out free around the subway or the train. So we figured out what their distribution was and matched it. So basically, if you lived in New York City, like these were all over the place, and we put them in other cities. And it was 14 pages of best case scenario news that was dated 9 months in the future. So we put this out in mid-November, about a decade ago, and the news was from July 4th, 2009, which was like a hint that this wasn't real. And what we were trying to do, again, talking about the feeling of the person receiving this paper on the street, was to have them feel like that they had been given a glimpse of a possible future as a gift, and that then they were kind of in on the joke and they could share it with other people. And that sounds great, but that was in opposed to like a feeling like they had been tricked and that they were given this, like a prank, right? Like given this newspaper and thought to believe that this better world was possible, and then to be let down, right? So a lot of the tone that we were trying to hit was sort of hopeful and realistic, right? So the way that we described the news in the paper was not like this deity, all powerful Barack Obama came in and saved everyone, but that through these stories of like popular pressure, that he had to yield to people and do this because this was it was overwhelming, the support for this policy. And we had troops turning home. We had an alternate tax system. We created a maximum wage. We talked about bike lanes being installed throughout the city, and like just all these transformations. Going back to the collaboration part, we had a lot of journalism groups and contributing to stories that we all wrote on a wiki, right? So the authorship was like very collective. We'd had almost no way of knowing who wrote what in it because of the way that we did it. And this bothered some of the journalist types, because they're so much about the integrity of the writing and stuff. And there were some clashes with that at different points, but we had this kind of more artistic collaboration model where ownership and authorship, I guess I should say, it's not as important. And then we distributed thousands of them on the streets and became this big international news story. But it was similar to presenting this other way that the world could work, right? So take all the ads and replace them with art is another way that the world can work. Video games that teach you how to relax instead of stress you out, or use competition to make your life better. is another way that the world can work, and giving you an experience of that. And when you got this newspaper, it was a similar thing of like having this experience of what a different world could be. Yeah, so I could go on. What do you think,
Well,
Laura?
I think that actually it would be great to give a little bit of context to those who are not familiar with this project. The project actually was honored an award of distinction, hybrid art at Prix Ars Electronica. So it had some echo in the art world as well. Mm-hmm. Among the most famous participants, I think that we can name the Yes Men, that I'm sure most of the attendees will know, and Code Pink.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And I think that actually now there is a question in the air. Do you think it's a time for another edition now that a page has turned with new election and hopes could be up again?
Certainly. I don't know anybody that's working on one. One of the things I kind of learned from being in the arts is good or bad, like that just to repeat stuff, it's just not, it's frowned upon. Like if you make the same artwork over and over again, or it's too similar, people are kind of like, they're in a rut, you know? We did make, the Yes Men and other folks went on and used this tactic in other ways, and it's been repeated in some other countries. And it's hard because it never quite has the impact of like the first time the New York Times has been like parodied. Actually, the New York Times themselves, the workers there when they were on strike one time in the 70s, made a fake New York Times. And so there is like a little bit of a history, and there's even history in Belgium in World War II. Like a bunch of print workers wrote a whole newspaper that I think was a future where they won and the Nazis had to leave. And this was during the Nazi occupation, and they put it all over the city. We learned about this about halfway through. And then we found out that almost everyone involved was murdered by the Nazis when they found out, which was terrifying to be working on a project. Like, not that we were going to be murdered for it, but it's like, oh my God, they took that really seriously. Like, what's this going to mean for us? Fortunately, we were never in mortal danger, but that tactic, I guess, had such a it touched a nerve so much with the powerful, you know. And when we did this in 2009, you know, it definitely had that kind of impact of like, how did you pull this off? You know, like, how did this not get stopped at some point? How is the New York Times not suing you? Which, in fact, they did threaten us. Many companies threatened us with lawsuits, but I think all of them expecting that we had no defense, and we did. You know, like we knew what our rights were and what we could do as artists, and to make commentary. And so as soon as we responded to them and said like, "How dare you? This is an artwork. This is freedom of speech," you know, like, and kind of make argument, we never heard from them again. But yeah. What I was gonna say is when it was repeated, it definitely didn't have the same punch, you know. But I think the core of the idea, which is like present people with a better world and show them how to get there and let them experience it, like that can take a lot of different forms. And I think that's a way to like take influence, right? I think there is benefit in kind of copying stuff and seeing how it works, but when you can actually get to the underlying ideas and figure out what's valuable about them and then repeat them. And you know, that's sort of going back to the video game and ad art. You know, I had like talked to the Yes Men early on and understood an underlying idea, which was present the world as it should be. And that was like what I took from them, and that got incorporated into a lot of projects I did. And then I got to work with them and just like took this little core of an idea I learned from them and made it even more extreme, when we work together. So there was something else I was going to say about this, but yeah, that's the special edition. Did you have a thought or a question, Laura?
Well, I think, you said it all at this point, I think, on the New York Times special edition. But I think that actually, when I asked you about the new edition, my point was more like, I think we are in a very similar moment in history.
Yes.
And I think this is why this work is becoming more and more relevant again, because tables are turning, so we expect a change to be made. And if that change won't happen, we will feel in the same way, in a sense. So
Yeah.
this is what I actually was ending to.
Yeah. So, it's funny though, like how I don't. Well, I can show this too, right? That you don't really realize the moment in history that something sort of exists in until you are out of that moment in history. So with this capitalism sign and the newspaper, like another thing that has changed between 2009 and now is like what fake news means. Like one of the nicknames for the project was the fake New York Times, which was fine with us at the time. It was kind of funny to call it the fake New York Times. And we were open about it being fake. And I think one of the key differences between what we were doing and what the Yes Men do, and like what hackers paid for by the Russian government working in Macedonia do, is that it's transparently fake. The news like that we're announcing, like we don't try to hide that it's an imaginary thing, it's in the future, that again, you're not being tricked, right? There's a transparency to it, and we didn't take credit for it immediately because we wanted a little bit of mystery about where it came from, because when there's mystery, people ask more questions and they think about it more. But we were ready to announce that we were the ones that made it, and reveal that, right? And that's part of the Yes Men's whole strategy, is like, yes, we're going to pretend, we're going to fool people, but we always reveal that we're the ones who did this, right? And this is why, that it's never hidden. And that transparency, and also I think the intention, right? Like good faith, bad faith, like we were making this thing because we wanted people to imagine a better world. We wanted to get there. I don't think that's the motivation of the GRU.
Well, it's also the status of the artwork itself, and that process that actually led to it, that kind of change, its authority and its status itself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's an intention and the actors behind it and everything. But it is weird how making, like, a form of fake news, I guess it's all under the umbrella of what could be called fake news, just so dramatically changed in the years after, right? Not even, yeah. So here is this work, which also has like I think now I'm able to see it existed in a moment in time too, or a period, right? So this I made in 2011 or 12, and it's 20 feet wide. Here's an idea of scale. This is it in Times Square. So you can see me in the foreground there with the hat on, and get a sense of like how big it is. It would be 7 meters wide, 3 meters tall. And it has this scoreboard, and then you at this podium can vote whether or not in your life capitalism works, true or false. And when you press the button, the number changes. So people would come up and get to decide in their life whether or not capitalism works. And this, in 2011, the thing to know is that there was no Occupy Wall Street yet. Occupy Wall Street came in October of that year after I made this. So another thing to know too, just sort of the US context around how most people here understand economics is there's never been like we don't have Antonio Gramsci as a hero here. We don't have any real legit communist party with any power. What you're taught in school, I went to good public schools, you know, and the lesson that you kind of learn is that there are other economic systems. All of them have problems. Capitalism does too, but capitalism is the best, you know, and of the problems that it has the best, you know, it's the least worst option. And also that it is American, that capitalism is part of the United States. And people here, sometimes are surprised to learn that capitalism isn't part of our founding documents, that it's not, it's not talked about in the Constitution. Like they think that it is. It's just part of how our government cannot work any other way. And so getting people to question capitalism and think about it and actually consider another way, and to say, well, we live in a democracy and we can have whatever kind of economy we want. And they're like, what? You know, so so that was the outcome, right, that I was looking for. Again, going back to this idea of outcomes, is to get people to question capitalism and to evaluate it on very personal terms, which is why on the podium it says, in my life, capitalism works or doesn't work, because everyone has opinions about how well capitalism works in these broad kind of general terms, or has ideas about how socialism or communism has failed. Like almost anyone on the street can speak to that, but that wasn't the conversation I wanted to have, right? So it's always come back to like, well, yeah, okay, that might have been true about this place, but what I'm asking is, in your life, do you feel like you're paid fairly? And they're like, oh, well, and it's often for a lot of people a question that they never considered. What was interesting, again, going back to that sort of moment in history kind of idea, is that since 2011, we have had a candidate here, Bernie Sanders, who was around for a long time, but ran for president, right, in 2016, and really popularized socialism as like a viable thing in the United States. And that has changed people's idea and how willing they are to critique capitalism and their critique of capitalism. So this sign works in a different way now. And yeah, I don't know. It's just been weird to have made it in this period in history, in this last like 10 years, you know. What else can I say about this, Laura?
Well, I think that actually you've kind of drawn very well how simple interactivity becomes inclusion, like how the idea of the interactive work, it becomes a starter to include people in the work, and people are part of the work. So in this capacity, I think that you have actually drawn a very sort of line to explain a little bit more how you develop the idea on how this works, engage with people.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder too. So I'll talk about two things. One is the experience that people have and how much that's designed, but also the technical part. So so you encounter this object, right? But you encounter it in a context. It's often like a town square. This is a pretty extreme version in Times Square, but people usually walk up to it. They're several meters away and they are just confused, right? Like I had people in Ohio, they're like, are you guys shooting a commercial? Which to me, it's like, what do you think we're selling? You know? But they sort of approach it. And because of the design and the flashing lights and these familiar elements like that look like scoreboards and things that people know and they understand voting, there's enough familiar elements of interaction or like reference points in the culture. The design of it is meant to be very assuring and nostalgic and familiar. And what happens is people think they understand it and they like it before they know what it is. Right. So all the aesthetic part is just meant to draw them in. We're like, this looks cool. And like, oh, I get to vote. Like, and but pressing a button, it's very simple, right? But by the time they're at the podium or they're in line and they're talking to people about how capitalism works for them, it's like, oh, I didn't really think about that, you know. They even just get really excited about pressing a big button. People, actually, this audience might understand this better than most. Like with Maker Faire folks, you know, like if you put buttons on something, people just want to mash the buttons, you know. So so having those simple elements and making it really appealing aesthetically draws people in. And then there's to how they're incorporated, right? So whatever they say gets considered. And there's a kind of improvised conversation that we have with them. And one of the things I tell the people that I work with is like, you always answer whatever they say, start with yes, right? So if they're like, well, capitalism doesn't work because, or capitalism works because if you work hard in this country, you can get ahead, which like is almost objectively false in this country. Like if you're really looking at the statistics, it's not true. But that's not what I say to that person. I say, oh, you're right. It is. Isn't that great about our country that if you work hard, you get ahead? But you know, I'll tell you, I just talked to somebody who was here just a minute ago, and they told me they work so hard, you know, doing this or that, and they're only able at their job the first 3 months or 3 weeks of the month. They're trying to pay for their rent, and then the last week of their work is for everything else. And that seems like, how hard do you have to work, you know? And then we just start talking, and we're challenging their ideas, but in this way that is their ideas are respected even when they're wrong, right? And then they press a button, and I don't tell them what button to press. I'm like, okay, whenever you're ready, you can press the button, and that's your vote. And then the number is registered, right? So even if they feel like no one understands me and I feel this thing, you know, like it's registered and it changes on the board. Like there's feedback that says what you say counted, you know, and it's visible. And that those kinds of things are really meaningful when you're asking for engagement from people in public, you know, that what they do will matter, and that they'll be heard. And then it's just a matter of like that as a starting point, as a way to like um, have them get something else out of it instead of just an expression of what they think and feel, right?
Well, there is the data visualization element that actually kind of it's very visible and sort of gives them an immediate feedback of what they've done. In a
Yeah,
sense,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
they see themselves out there,
And it's
recognized.
helpful too, like, you know, it's not a stereotype. It's true. Like there would be older men with white hair who often would be retired, and they're like, yeah, it works for me. Yeah, I worked this one job my whole life, and I'm retired, and I have healthcare, like things are good, and I'm here on vacation. And I'd be like, well, you should definitely hit true. And they would do it, and the number would change. I'm like, yeah, so you're number 84. I'm like, but you can see over here on this other side, there are a lot of people who, you know, like me, like the idea of working in one place my whole life just seems completely out of reach. And I'm only, you know, maybe 20 years younger than you. And they'd be like, oh, wow, you know, yeah, I guess so. And so that data visualization of being able to point to like, it does work for you. I'm not going to question that, but look at what's happening here, right? And like, what do we do about that? It definitely doesn't work for everyone. And sometimes that would be an opening point for us to like have this deeper conversation. Um, I'll also just mention really quickly, I don't have pictures of this, but all of this is controlled with like Arduinos and, you know, stuff that I bought from the places that we buy things. A place called Evil Mad Scientist Industries or something, like had the 7-segment displays, and all of this was sort of custom. And again, like at the beginning, I had this idea of what I needed it to do, and pressing the button and changing the numbers, and I had done like sort of similar things before, and worked with a friend who is more skilled at that kind of engineering. And yeah, it's all real common materials, Arduinos and basic electronics and relays and things like that. So okay, let's keep going.
We have a few minutes left.
Oh, okay.
So I would like to ask if anybody have any other question from the audience. If not, I would like to ask Steve just one last, we have really 3 minutes, but I would like to ask you one last thing. On your website now, the banner reads, Steve Lambert is organizing for a people's vaccine. What does it mean?
So we started a group of people around the world that are advocating to make sure that the COVID-19 treatment and testing and diagnostics, right? Treatment, testing, and the vaccines are available to everyone for free, right? That nobody should be poor because they're sick, or sick because they're poor, is one of the sayings that we use. And so that means a lot of our governments, and like in the EU, paid to develop the vaccine, and then the pharmaceutical companies and the arrangements they make want us to pay a second time to get them after we've paid to develop them. And so this is the group, and I can show this site really quickly too. But it's at freethevaccine.org, and what we do is give people training in artistic activism and some of the things that we've talked about, that like creative process idea, and tactics and techniques. Like this was a march that was in London where they had a COVID character and doctors chasing after it, injecting it with these giant syringes that they made, giant checks in front of Moderna showing the billions of dollars that they've received from the US government as a way of advocating for changes and accessibility to everyone, because we will not be safe until everyone is safe, right? We won't have immunity until everyone is. And here in the United States, the pharmaceutical lobby is the biggest lobby. They have the most money and the most people, and so it's a huge thing to take on, but we've made a lot of progress, and we're going to do another round in February if people want to join, and you get some training in artistic activism and you get to work on an actual campaign. So
thank you, Steve, and thank you for this great presentation. I would like to thank again the Maker Faire for having us today, and everyone who has attended. If you have any other curiosity or idea that you want to explore about Steve's practice, you can find it at visitsteve.com. Thank you so much again, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.